Pre-iOS 14.5, I might go in and look at Facebook first thing and make decisions based on that. Now, I'm typically starting a day looking at what's the Shopify overall.
Facebook's still useful, but the reality is, like, at the lower levels, when you're doing tests in the short term or spending small amounts, because Facebook data is delayed and because they're using conversions that are modeled, unless you spend a lot, you're not going to be seeing the direct results of like the first touch attribution in your ads like you would if you're using, Facebook, GA, and then these third-party tools that we're going to talk about all kind of together.
I think in a lot of ways we're a lot stronger than we once were because we've become comfortable with just countless more signals.
Hey retailers, ever feel like your shopper experience feels just like everyone else's? Here's an idea. Put your shopper first with the only personalization platform that is purpose-built for retailers. Bluecore combines retail data and predictive intelligence to match online shoppers with the products they will buy next across channels like email, site, paid media, social, and SMS. Automate and scale your personalized content offers and recommendations for each shopper in a one-on-one individualized experience. Visit Bluecore.com to see why brands like Noble, Express, and Bliss have gone shopper first to drive repeat purchases and increase customer lifetime value. Hello and welcome to All Killer No Filler. It's Wednesday. I'm slightly under the weather, but hanging in there with Pilothouse co-founder Kyle Hitchcox as well as senior media buyers Taylor and Grayson. Welcome to All Killer No Filler, guys. This conversation kind of came together when Grayson made some observations about some accounts that he was kind of looking into, and he got a sense that there's still a lot of advertisers out there who are using Facebook's on-signal platforms to make their day-to-day decisions, potentially their longer-term monthly budgeting decisions, as if iOS 14.5 didn't happen. So I wanted to just have a conversation with some of the stakeholders on our side who are really deep into the attribution side of things and talk about what it is that we're doing, what sort of platforms we've used, and what sort of attribution looks like. What is this now? 3 or 4 months after the iOS 14.5 apocalypse. Grayson, do you want to just start us off a little bit about what you're kind of seeing in the space?
For sure, yeah. So like Facebook's still useful, especially if you're looking at like account-wide or campaign-wide data that's like super long-term, or you're at a high spend where you're getting tons and tons of data in. But the reality is, like at the lower level, so like ad set or definitely like ad level, when you're doing tests in the short term or spending small amounts, because Facebook data is delayed and because they're using, conversions that are modeled, unless you spend a lot, you're not going to be seeing the direct results of like the first touch attribution on your ads like you would if you're using, Facebook, GA, and then these third-party tools that we're going to talk about all kind of together. So if you're just spending on a creative campaign, you're testing 8 different creatives, you spend it for like a week, whatever your 2x AOV is per day. If you get like 5 conversions off that, what you're seeing in Facebook at the ad level could be completely different than what's truly driving your performance. And when you're like benchmarking those ads side by side, those 2 conversions matter a ton when you're deciding, if this UGC creative is best or if this, static ad is best. So yeah, that's kind of like where it's stand.
You mentioned something there too, just to back up for listeners who may not be fully adepts at this digital marketing thing. 2x AOV as sort of a benchmark for what you're willing to spend on a creative. Is that I know everyone has different rules for that, but is that sort of like the standard benchmark you're talking about there?
Yeah, just like as a very bare minimum, if you're just like doing a huge contrast test of like very different creatives. There's tons of different testing schemes you could do depending on your spend and stuff, but I'd say that's like the very bare minimum you want to do daily.
What are some of these dangerous things that you could be like looking at on Facebook right now, taking as gospel, and then potentially eventually getting burned by in the end?
Yeah, so like on the Facebook side with those modeled conversions, like I said, like what we're seeing is conversions piling up, usually related to click costs and spend. Facebook knows a purchase happened in the campaign, but they just don't know exactly which ad it happened on, or it's signaling that you got a view conversion off of a top of funnel campaign that you think is top of funnel, but really it's also hitting bottom of funnel users that are kind of blind in the system due to iOS 14. Because remember, in iOS 14, your exclusion audiences and your inclusion audiences are both affected by the lack of targeting. So on the Facebook side, we're seeing those conversions pile up on the top spenders or the lowest click cost ads in that campaign. But then when we look at GA and we look at these third-party tools, they're telling us different signals. GA, as an example, it's last touch, so it's going to show you just like the bare truth. So it's probably going to show you less than Facebook. And because it's last touch, you need to be careful too around, what's really driving that sale. If it's just someone who was, like I said, a bottom of funnel person that you thought was top of funnel, that could also be driving some conversions there that aren't what you're testing for. But as an example, yeah, GA and our third-party tracking is showing different results than Facebook dramatically.
Taylor, are you going to add anything there?
Yeah, I was going to share an example, actually. We launched a very successful promo with a client that I media buy with just this past week. There we use a customer survey as well to gather direct data from the customer about how they heard about the brand. Happens during the checkout process. That's where we back a lot of the data as we're looking at all these holistic signals. Just for context, in Facebook Ads Manager reporting, we saw that there were 71% less assigned conversions compared to what our third-party data source showed. And if we look at the trend lines in GA, where we're seeing more direct click sales, as well as customer survey, we can see that there was a growth line for the brand overall that aligns with the scaling that we did, particularly at top of funnel. So the risk there, as Grayson alluded to, is missing out on some of those opportunities to look at some of that first touch data, what's really moving the needle, and seeing how you can grow pretty aggressively there at lower cost.
Hey guys, I'm really curious, what's changed for you as buyers from kind of when it first hit through to kind of today? What was that transition, as a buyer, in brackets, losing that data, the data was scrambled and you got half of it. What was that process to get to where we are?
Yeah, speaking to that, I mean, I know for us, we've always had the mentality of, we think through like an incremental lens. We've always looked at it that way, like what are we really adding as far as value to the store by running our ads and scaling our ads? What kind of lift are we seeing? But before iOS 14.5, in a lot of cases, it was easier to rely on the direct data in, say, Ads Manager and looking more on our day-to-day, just specifically at that and scaling based on that data. Since we've seen this...
Well, we were looking like hourly. I mean, we were refresh nuts. I think we were making, a lot of our buying strategies were high volume creative, cut it really fast, surely transitioning out of that into kind of a different pilothouse method.
Exactly.
You mentioned the week is something I just heard on a podcast pre-interview I did today. I bet I'd like just needing to give things that full time window rather than putting a lot of volume through short times. I've heard that come up as a theme. That's sort of the way people have needed to adapt to sort of break out to like longer time periods potentially.
Can you guys expand on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first half of it is like the algorithm side. So like because Facebook isn't as smart anymore. It doesn't have all that info on people. It's taking longer for those campaigns on the Facebook Ads Manager side to get that kind of momentum and get into those audiences that are really valuable top of funnel. And then on the data side, on our side, everyone knows Facebook has a delay for one, but because like all that data is spotty, and like I was saying, how like especially in those like early testing phases, if a couple conversions are swaying the needle and telling you dramatically which, angle is doing best, you're going to need more data to be coming in to kind of like fill that gap, if that makes sense.
Totally. I want to dive into the third-party sort of tools that we've used to mitigate this, but I'm just curious, like, what are there still? I know again that every buyers have different methods, but what are the metrics that are on the Facebook platform that can still be used as those canaries in the coal mine or leading indicators?
Yeah, I mean, there's still like a lot that you can use. We lean more, I'd say, into a blended approach, looking at trends and shifts rather than specifically relying on on what the specific metric is. For example, so like we're still seeing good consistency with the front end stuff like link CTR, link CPC, CPM, looking at how those change over time together. I think the biggest thing is just more so the lens we're looking at it through now. That's shifted quite a bit, and you can still gain relative data valuable to how you're measuring overall store lifts and things like that too, and what you see in GA.
Quick question on that. Sorry, Eric.
That's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Taylor, can you be very specific? Like, you've shifted the lens. Talk about what that lens is. Share with the listeners exactly what we're doing with GA, with our third-party tools and Facebook. What does that correlation look like, and where's that instinctual decision-making coming from?
That's Google Analytics for any noobs out there. Always like to specify the acronyms.
Great call. Yeah, so I mean, I think the easiest way to frame it is a day-to-day. Pre-iOS 14.5, I might go in and look at Facebook first thing and make decisions based on that. Primarily, maybe a quick look at Shopify, but that's really what I'm looking through. Now, I'm typically starting a day looking at what's the Shopify overall, what's the up-down number on that, and then I'll go into GA, usually using the source medium report under acquisition. You can go in and take a look at your UTMs. You can drill into the campaign level if you're tracking that in your ads using UTMs. Highly recommend, if anybody isn't doing that, they do start that. And then you can go in and look at metrics like early in the day, we might look at time on site. We might look at the session depth. We might look at bounce rate and see where the best pockets are. We'll look at how that compares to longer term. And then we'll try to gauge, okay, like how do we want to make decisions to either preserve or scale budget today based on the data that we're seeing. And then when we look at Ads Manager, having looked at those other sources already, I have a good idea of what the benchmarks are. If I've been working with a brand for at least a little while, like a couple of months or a little bit longer, I have a really good idea of what do the numbers look like in an upswing, what do they look like in a downswing, and then we'll look at how those metrics compare basically to the gut check, as well as going back and looking at previous days, previous weeks, like a longer term window. How does if I've been doing it day to day for a while, how does this day to day stack up against the longer term window? What might be missing, and how do I want to make those decisions based on that? That's kind of the process there. If you're for cases where we're not using something like a third party data partner.
I'm going to chime in too really quick, relying on your sources of truth. So building on what Taylor said about, using all those. Now we have 10 tabs open and we're looking through all our data to understand what's going on. At the end of the day, that last tab, the most important one, is your Shopify. So it's all kind of tethered towards that, right? So it's at the end of the day, what's your efficiency at? What is it usually at this time? And then understanding, did an email blast go out today? So you got to be really coordinated with your team too to understand, where their traffic sources are coming from. And at the end of the day, if you're spending more and you're seeing that incremental lift, day by day, then even if you can't see the signals in Facebook or GA or whatever you're using, as long as you can be certain and you're using your source of truth, it's from you. So
you're making money, keep spending, baby.
That's the way to do it. Performance marketers credo. We all know how tough the past 12 months have been with supply chain and marketing costs rapidly rising. ECOMWORLD is your secret weapon to help your brand get back on track and make this year your best year ever. ECOMWORLD is hosting an online event that will arm you with the strategies you need to grow your D2C brand profitably. Meet experts like Kellen Fitzgerald, head of ecom at Glow Recipe, and Davey Fogarty, CEO of The Oodie, as well as 80 other ecom experts who are paving the way in D2C. Get their step-by-step strategies to optimize the growth of your ecom brand right now. D2C listeners receive 30% off the ticket price, so head over to ecomworldconference.com/DTC to get your ticket now. That's ecomworldconference.com/DTC. I want to dive into, you mentioned the, what those numbers that we actually saw in terms of the sort of data loss we're seeing top of funnel and bottom of funnel, and how we've corrected that a little bit with third-party vendors. I want to dive into actually what we do when we have that data. But first, Taylor, can you start a little bit by telling the audience, rhyme off some of the data partners that we have sort of evaluated and looked into, tested, because I know there's a bunch in the space right now.
Yeah, so the four major ones are Northbeam.io, Segment Stream, Rockerbox, and Hyros.
And from a high level, what are these tracker platforms, purporting to do?
Yeah, the major thing with these ones is they're MTA or multi-touch attribution ones. They focus on using either stitching or modeling or a combination of both based on first-party data that goes to the site and potentially anything kind of within their network of trend lines and stuff like that as well at the platform. And then they work to basically aim to fill the gaps and show an agnostic view of what is moving the needle. Each one's got, each platform's a little bit different in terms of features and elements like that, what that mission statement might look like. But that's ultimately what they all aim to do.
Very cool. Now, when we do implement them, like what are we actually, what actions are we taking when we get data, for instance, that the top of funnel ROAS is 71% higher than what Facebook is reporting?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, like I do want to note a big caveat there is that we're on our end, we're always skeptical of everything that we're looking at. And it really shows the importance of looking at eROAS and ecosystem and making sure you're creating some benchmarks internally. That's what really I think dictates the success of brands when it comes to allocating budget in this new world. But once, as we're looking through, like a good example, and with that case, we have the customer survey running at the same time. I'm looking at the trend line there and the other trend lines in the store. Once we're able to back that out and we see that, and we can see that there's common patterns between the sources we're looking at, then that's when we start to say, hey, let's scale this and see how we're pushing for that. Basically where we can keep scaling it to.
Taylor, I know we've partnered with a few of these companies and providing these services and training to our clients, especially on our scale clients. In your honest, transparent opinion, like how often is this successful, and how often do these platforms work on their own without that additional personal or gut or as Grayson said, having 10 tabs open of different
multi-tab
sources.
Approach,
Yeah. Can you talk about that experience, guys, and then maybe a recommendation at the end in terms of how to approach it with and without a data partner?
Yeah, I think like transparently from my perspective, I think like at the end of the day, I transparently probably wouldn't look solely at that one source without at least getting some sort of gut check on everything else. I mean, usually it can be pretty quick to tell. If you've been looking at your Shopify data recently and things like that, you can see, does the overall match up? Does this generally feel like it makes sense based on, when I launched an email blast and what happened in the store then? And did I see some sort of weird direction with traffic in this one? The key here is that because it leverages first party data and there's usually modeling going on along with stitching, there can be certain bias there at times, and so it does take some gut check in my eyes to make sure that you're feeling confident in it.
What is stitching, by the way? Again, for the noob out there, and for me in this case, is it stitching things like stitching your IP to where your IP has been seen a few times? Is that what it is?
Exactly, yeah. So it's stitching parts of the journey based on signals like IP, and IP is usually one of the top ones that comes up. More than anything, it's about getting that detailed understanding of what is this attribution model in this representing? Is it, and what is happening behind the scenes there as much as you can get from the platform. So having a baseline level of understanding, though, like it at the end of the day, there's tons of value that we've found from getting familiar and comfortable enough with it and looking at some of even the high level patterns from what I've seen, as far as then being confident to scale some of those first touch pockets that can be really hard to see with data loss in this modern environment. And Grayson, I'm interested if you have thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, they're still algorithmic in nature. So they build these algorithms for, general use, but you really need to dig in and work with them to make sure that, depending on your AOV or what your touch points are typically with your brand, that they're valuing those touches accordingly to how it's driving people down the funnel and not just kind of generally. Obviously it still can work, but yeah.
There's no one size fit all solution. There's no silver bullet is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
The AI isn't ready to take over. It still needs that human touch, which I love to hear. Grayson, you also mentioned another way of sort of gut checking. The platform specifically regarding geo-testing. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't have one of these platforms, or if you do and you're trying to test it out, like one way to do that, to again be that guy who's just slamming the source of truth button, is geo-testing. So like on Snapchat, this is something we would typically do because Snapchat doesn't play nice with GA. It's a very first touch oriented platform, and that's like kind of their pitch, is that it's first touch. So, you know, they're not going to be there when you're plugging in the promo code, etc. So what, like high level, what you want to do is take certain states that you have historical data on in Shopify, understand that data on your other platforms as well, get those benchmarks. And then, you know, depending on how much, like, you know, at what scale you're at, kind of what risk appetite you have as far as, you know, pausing up the majority of your spend on your main states, you maybe want to choose like secondary states that have very consistent revenue volumes, but are still, you know, big enough that they have volume where you have enough data to work with. So you take those secondary states, get those benchmarks, and then essentially, you know, you set up all your tracking and you push spend to those states in particular, and, you know, minimize your spend or keep it the same as it always would be. And that way you're seeing the actual lift of your traffic from that specific increase in spend. And then you see on your platform kind of what that looks like.
You know, Grayson, it's funny. You started working with us in the era of the pixel, and your, you know, career has been built on it. Really, it's funny. Like, Eric, that just sounds to me like how we used to buy traffic. You spend broadly. You'd cut in on device type, on screen size, on states. You'd go into cities. You find anything you could to optimize on, and it just reminds me of how we used to buy, to be honest, you know, 6-7 years ago. So really happy to hear that you guys are finding every way possible to make that conversion happen.
It comes down to incrementality, right? And I think this is something, Taylor, you hit on, but and you were just finishing up with it, Grayson. Like, you just really have to focus you just have to narrow down the variables so that you can just look as cleanly as you can at whether you're driving incremental revenue.
One more question from me, guys, pending time here. How is your creative selection, creation, and testing methodology shifted? You know, what are you doing this month that is different than before?
You know, what's different now compared to pre-iOS 14? I touched this on at the beginning, but you know, allowing that creative to breathe. I think you mentioned that, Eric. You know, letting your tests spend for longer, making sure if you're doing those creative contrast tests that, you know, you're not just looking at Facebook at the ad level and you're seeing what's actually, like, you know, driving people to that purchase. I would say also, there he goes. I would say also, like, you know, getting extra contrast with it. So this kind of goes with like all data loss. It could go for like pages or ad copy or whatever you're testing. But when you have data loss, you know, it's really, really nice to hyper contrast so that the changes are as big as possible. Like, the smaller or more iterative the test is, the more data you need to have. So the more contrasted you can be, you can kind of speed up or you know, get clearer data.
And then you can fine tune on the winners with some of the smaller details, I imagine, right? You find those big clear angles, the big clear headlines. You can drill in on the smaller details.
Exactly. Like, once you're willing to spend into something that you know generally works, then you can also slam spend into that, right? And then you can, you know, polish out that angle.
Slam spend. That's a new term. I hadn't heard it to this podcast. I love it. From your perspective, Kyle, what are you seeing in the creative side of things?
Same fundamentals. We're making, instead of making, you know, 20 assets in a week for a company, we're making 8, and we're testing them longer. I think that there's our testing budgets are longer, and they're sitting there without such swift decision making. And I think, like Grayson said, the importance of this contrast idea has become very important. I think brands are also coming around to this idea where, you know, performance in bracket, you know, in some cases for a lot of companies has decreased. You know, is that is that an actual decrease, or is it just on platform shifts, and does that create a panic? But what we're seeing is a lot more flexibility with creative decision making around brand, and companies are one of our clients who's a stickler. We love them. Let us throw spaghetti on their product the other day because we just needed to test some really weird contrasty stuff to see if it would move the needle. And so
Literally throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks. Literally in this
throwing
case.
spaghetti against the wall.
Love it.
Yeah. I don't know
the
how it
alternative.
did. We won't comment there, but we're just seeing a lot of creativity in how people are solving problems, and we're all coming together to do it, and clients are proactive around change and understanding, and the fact that the market has shifted a little bit, but we're getting by pretty good.
Taylor, how about you? Anything to add on the how your workflow, your process has changed in regards to creative testing and scaling?
I think these guys hit it on the head. Yeah, we've adapted where we need to adapt. I think in a lot of ways, we're a lot stronger than we once were because we've become comfortable with just countless more signals, and we're leaning into that, and we're looking at patterns and trends. We're leveraging filters, et cetera, to find as much data as we can and make those decisions.
As an organization, we've certainly leaned into this. Looking for the silver bullet. Whether we found it or not, we don't know. But we're looking at as many signals and indicators as possible on an ongoing basis, and Taylor's moved into a technical manager role specifically for Facebook, so he's on the hunt for the silver bullet. So if anyone's got it out there, let us know what it is, but until then we'll use Shopify as our source of truth.
Awesome. Thanks for your time today, guys. It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.